Okay. Hi everybody. Today we're live with Cesar FRAGACHAN, and he has a startup called Aalter.ai. It's focused on providing automated architecture and interior design solutions through real-time rendering, cloud platform, and seamless integration with CAD, BIM software, designers, architects, and developers to gain access to custom configurators, empowering their creativity while streamlining workflows and facilitating informed decision-making through real-time data metrics. He currently teaches at UCL, Bartlett School of Architecture, a research-based unit on computational participatory design and digital fabrication, and he's a former computational designer at the Zaha Hadid Computational Design Group. He holds a master's in Architecture and Urbanism degree with distinction from the Architectural Association Design Research Laboratory and a master in Business Administration from IESA Institute. Okay, so Cesar, welcome to the Fusion Architecture channel. I'm glad to have you here, and we're excited to see what you're going to show about what you've been working on. So go ahead and get started with your demo. Thank you, Cesar.
Thank you very much for the intro, Daniel. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So quite honored, and thank you for the invitation. Um, Without further ado, let me share a little bit the work. So hopefully it will take you also a little through. Let me just completely share. And can you confirm you're seeing the screen, Daniel?
Yes,
The
I see the screen. Yeah, you're good.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll take you a little bit through the journey from architect to computational designer, and now as a founder of the company, as you mentioned. So after leaving Venezuela back in it was already 5 years ago, a bit more. I started like a DRL, so I was always quite interested and fascinated a little bit about gamification in architecture, also about the idea of empowering people to customize their homes. And as designers, we want to potentially try to get everyone's intention or everyone design. When we're working on big projects, it's very hard to satisfy everything, right? So nowadays, almost like the model is about fit one or all solutions. So we kind of embraced standardization. So like the idea of these highly academic project at the time of the master was to empower people to customize their own homes, put their own units, even some of the community spaces. So it was a gamified platform where different users jumped in and negotiated a lot of those spaces. So it was collecting data in the process and also leveraging within digital fabrication to build some of these spaces. So matching the digital and the physical world, it's been an important part of my career, and some of the things that we are also pushing at school. So these two models that you see, like the one was a prototype that we did, in one-to-one prototype at the DRL in a company called Odico in Denmark. And then the one on the right was in Autodesk Boston, the build space, also leveraging hot wire cutting with robotic fabrication. So that led to the journey on the computational design group at Zaha Hadid. We're working on big projects, from competitions to delivery stages. So a lot of these projects kind of involved a lot of computation, rationalization of complex geometry. And the one in the bottom left is the Beyabu villas that are in the Roatan Islands in Honduras. So everything that you see here is a modular construction that is standardized in a kit of parts, which is crafted, let's say, like just to leverage on empowering like that design. So for these projects, we built a configurator. So users actually were coming into the platform. We were driving the sales of some of these units, where we start gathering the data of how people would they like to position their spaces, what sort of spatial requirements would they have, and also adding some extra features of buying air rights. So you could say, okay, I want to lock the side of my unit because potentially later I want to expand that space. I don't want anyone to be on the top because I want to add a palapa, or have this double height space. So I don't want anyone else on top of me. So you start buying the air right as well, not only the unit. And then also, you can start customizing the internal layout for any given modular site. You see here, like this one is assembled based on three voxels of 5 by 5. And then users could actually then get in and start overlooking what's the view of that property, how are the neighbors blocking the view. So they could even negotiate some of these spaces. So that turned out to be an interesting exercise, and actually kind of like the pinpoint to then jump on my own and starting Alter. So basically this was the first demo that we built at the company. So it's connected to OpenStreet data. So it's procedurally regenerating let's say like a section of the city based on actual information. And then there's an evolutionary algorithm that it starts running through the site that is specified by the developer in this case. And what you see in colors and what you see optimizing on the right are the financial metrics, and in colors there's the radiation, the solar radiation. So the algorithm is trying to optimize or minimize some of these quantitative data. Users could also parametrically override some of the, let's say like the findings or the outputs from the algorithm. So they could customize and say how many towers, what's the typology of the building that they would like to see. And they can also style the facade. So everything is deployed within a kit of parts. And then you could very quickly, I mean, and this is not an animation, right? Like this is actually how the software is working at the current speed. Maybe it's speed up. I think it's speed up by half just for the sake of this video, but it's quite fast. And then users could actually engage in pre-sales of the construction and start seeing how that unit, which might be generic in structure for all the bottom units, but then you can start customizing the interiors and give a little bit like this gameplay agency to the people that are going to buy these houses. They could go through almost like an FPS or a first person shooter game where they could actually feel like the space, what's the view, how was the relationship. And eventually some of the things that we would be interested in also having is that exploration of the community or the virtual community, where you could see what your neighbors are doing in or on other properties, potentially copy some of them or even meet them online before. So this is another demo, also for this is a home supply or store color, which basically commercializes a high luxury bathroom items. So it's building a virtual showroom configurator for to start on their stores, but then pass to the website. So users in this case, they could choose the measurement of their bathroom, or choose a specific layout within those given measurements, and then the system would procedurally generate all the items and would have embedded some styles that users can start choosing between the styles, but then go through each of the items that is connected to the database of these assets and start seeing what's the price and what are the finishes. So instead of seeing a static view on the website, you would see that specific piece in your bathroom. It's connected also with a multiplayer platform, so you could start having a conversation with a virtual agent that could be driving and helping you out to configure your bathroom in this case, and then produce a full brochure of all the, let's say like the items that you're interested in buying. So again, a similar experience for more for the real estate world, or um, where two users can be in the same sessions. This could also be tailored to designers, so they can drive, let's say, their clients, or again like the agents going driving through their clients just to show them the properties and showcase like different potential configurations of that space. One of the things that we are currently developing, it's going to be an app for both virtual staging at the beginning, and then eventually, if it proves successful, then just take it to market just so people can then configure through their phone. It's using a room scan technology released by Apple almost a couple of years ago. So that this technology basically indexes all the other elements within a given space, windows, walls, and then there's an algorithm that starts optimizing based on the space that you want. And then let's say our technology would procedurally generate all these items, would add like the given lighting, and it also connected to the database of the stores. You can then start seeing how all of these furnitures or items look in the space. You could have also like pre-selected styles, and then you can start adjusting them one by one. Now, this one, so one of our clients is a modular construction company here in the UK. They work mainly for student accommodation, and we're developing this tool that they can very quickly iterate through different design concepts, study all the financial metrics, schedules of accommodation, build of materials. So it's a plugin in Rhino and Revit that then communicates with the cloud platform, and then you can start very quickly iterating through different facade styles, of all of the options that are being pushed by the designers. So you could not only evaluate a building by financial metrics, or let's call them schedules of accommodation, build a material, but you can actually qualitatively evaluate a building by its looks, by its facade, and then run solar animations on how the building is exposed to the light throughout the day. And then it also has a path tracer functionality, since it's kind of built within Unreal Engine, and you can extract also like all the, let's say, like all the entourage, people, trees, cars, is reconstructed procedurally from OpenStreetMap data. So designers don't need to really care that much. I mean, there's a lot of time that is spent. So this is not to take your high fidelity render that you're going to push, but it's just to take those images that could go through planning applications, or just to take high level decisions in early stages of a project. Using Cesium, we're also leveraging like that technology just to embed Google Tiles and photogrammetry within the building, so you could see how all of your options look within the actual city. And then this is from the plugin side of the, so this is for styling properties as well. This is like the plugin that they were currently developing for them, just to have a very quick parametric tool where you could adapt all of their modules based on circulation and fire exit. So it will start computing also like what's the optimum dimension of the modules, just to maximize the number of units without sacrificing comfort, and optimizing also to have the maximum net sellable area. And since all the software is intelligent enough that it knows what unit is in a corner, what unit is connected to a circulation, it will deploy all the architectural components, and then let's say all those elements will get exported into a Revit format. So again, like this is just a little bit on the technical side, how it connects to OpenStreetMap data. So you could run very quickly from the plugin different context analysis straight away. So it's all automated. You could see from the app different styles, and then different material style. So you can very quickly evaluate at any point any facade option, or any detail. So one of the things that we just also integrated within the plugin is a stable diffusion connector. So you could basically take from your screenshot in Rhino, you can just put the prompt, and then this one has let's say a LoRa model that is also trained with the client's style. So you could get some high fidelity of renders of the actual style too, just to do this very early stage and concept exploration of different kits. And lastly, So we work through let's say like the different stages. So these one once you let's say like there's also a property that can be sold. This is for another client. So this is demo also on a complex in London where you can start evaluating, seeing what are the main features on the city, and they have a phase development that is going to come in stages, and they're going to be sold in stages, so they can unlock different sites, and then the users or like the people that are interested in buying any of these properties, they can see the floor plan, get inside, and also then start choosing between different styles, layouts, and then they can also start configuring each of the furniture. So ideally, what we would like to push it is potentially you could even then, completely buy or completely set your interior design. So by the moment that you want to move to these properties, you already have, let's say, all the furniture that you need on the correct location, right? So we have if a digital twin already exists, then this digital twin model can live also, on in the future. So running again out different conditions of solar analysis, um, because people that want to move into some of these properties would like to see what's the from the view of the property, but also what's the solar influence. So this is all real time. It's not being animated. This is kind of like the quality that you can get from a game engine, specifically on Unreal at the moment. And then leveraging also on the configurator technology that we plug in. So I think that's a little bit on our side. Um, I think I'll leave it running for a couple more seconds, just to see a couple of more shots. But basically, that wraps a little bit like the story. So we're quite early still at the moment. It's been um, just a year since we started. So yeah, looking forward to what we can push in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Cesar. That was very interesting. It's amazing to see, I guess, your examples. And I see you showed them to me before, so I find it like really interesting, how it is evolving, and then like some of the capabilities that you're kind of pursuing at the moment, and how that essentially is going to evolve as software gets better, as streaming online gets better, and all this technology gets better, where we can have kind of these real-time interactions in design on the web. It seems like that's an overall trend in the industry where we're trying to create web apps and then being able to run everything. So it's a little bit more collaborative and a little bit more accessible to all the stakeholders. Can you maybe talk about like a little bit about your journey of how you got to this point, or maybe like a little bit of your
Yeah,
background? Because you do have a quite
absolutely.
interesting background.
I appreciate it. Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to. So, um, I did my bachelor's. I mean, thank you for all that. Like the kind words as well. I mean, it's quite motivating, just to hear it from someone, like that is exposed to this. Because at some point, like when you're on your almost like on your own, and then like you could be like just programming and running lines of code and code and code, and you forget about like that big vision, or you sometimes like there's like these little devils kind of like talking like, okay, this might not be for everyone, but like when having, let's say, like having this reaction, the positive reaction from like different people in the industry, it's really motivating for us. So I quite appreciate it. Also, like all this effort, just to push this sort of interview. So quite appreciate it from your side, Daniel. Talking a little bit on my side. So I did my bachelor in Venezuela. I started working for a couple of years, and then I was really frustrated by the way that, how long did it take to do a project, and even what's even worse is that almost like that creative part where we put, let's say, like that effort into the concept stages, it just gets sucked up, like all that excitement and all that creativity through later stages, which then becomes like the time that is the most mechanical, the most, like in a way that it's less exciting, although a lot of people find excitement in the stages, and that's great. In my case, it was not like that. So I really wanted to have those creativity moments, right? Like where it's more about the design than the coordination, or then or just the drawing, right? It blew my mind how, if we do things in AutoCAD, then you start finding yourself, spending hours just trimming lines, and then
Yeah.
it was really excruciating, like all the time that is put into that process. So I started at the time then. I said, okay, I think I need. Also, Venezuela was passing through a very rough time. I think at that time, my wage, like my monthly wage, was around between $50 and $100 a month because of the devaluation of the coin. So I said, okay, like it doesn't make sense. Almost like be working. Oh, let's start it. Let's just go study again. And I always have like a little bit like the entrepreneurial spirit. So I said, oh, let's go and do an MBA, a Master in Business and Administration. So I enrolled on a course, like it was a 1 year full, do it like part-time, but I said, okay, I want to do it full-time in 1 year. And then I started at the late, I mean, it was an interesting journey. I took also like an entrepreneurial class, which then we started going down to the fishermen's buying fish and then go then to all the restaurants and try saying, like who would want to buy fish. So it was kind of like this idea of, what do we have at the moment? Okay, we have a car, we have some coolers, we know some people, like some fishermen, we know some people, in restaurants. So it's like kind of that was also very exciting just to start seeing, okay, how money works, and then how even as architects, like we we forget sometimes about our clients, like that they have their targets, right? Like their financial targets. There's a marketing as well visions that we could even leverage, about who's our client, who's our target customer. So there's a lot of interesting things, like that I would, encourage every architect to also, understand about marketing, about the financials, for even for your own personal life, right? Because at the end of the day, and I think it by your personal experience, and is you're trying to sell yourself as well, right?
Yeah.
Like that's quite important, how you promote yourself out there. So at the end, our thesis on the master was to produce basically a business model. So one of the things is, okay, I want to connect my passions, right? Like I want to connect the architectural world with the business world. So I started, to start finding disruptive, um let's say, disruptive trends at the time. So there was a computational design and digital fabrication where, at the moment, it was almost 10 years ago. So they were kind of started to, to grow. Grasshopper, launched, like I think like 5 years before that. This was 2014, more or less, or around the time. So I said, okay, this is quite exciting, computational design, digital fabrication, I started really got in, planned like a whole business model around it. And then I said, okay, I want to commit to this, right? So I went back home. There was no one knew what Grasshopper was, what an algorithm on design. That it was absolutely, you couldn't go to, and even online, there were not that much resources. So I said, okay, where's the next Grasshopper
Mhm.
course? So it was in Miami. So I got in a flight to Miami, spent there a week, the McNeil Center, and then I got fascinated. Like I said, like, okay, wow, like this is amazing. Where how you could automate a lot of these tasks. So I started
Yeah.
really, obsessing basically just to learn like the software, and learn how to do with algorithms. And then I started designing furniture. So I came back home. I saw that there was only one guy, I think, like in the whole city that had a CNC machine. So I started bothering that guy, like every day
Yeah.
almost. Like I said, I wanted to construct these chairs, all made by parts, quite influenced by Joris Larman at the time,
Mhm.
which was doing pretty interesting research as well in digital fabrication. So I mean, it was kind of like also like painful, but Venezuela was even going like rough stream. At that time, it reached the point then with the riots that all the country froze. So I said, okay, I broke my femur. So I then had like these almost um San Ignacio de Loyola, which is kind of like a saint, like he fractured his femur at the time, and then he was a warrior, and then he became a saint. It was kind of like a similar issue, a fractured. I said, okay, I need to leave the country. I need to, start pushing the boundaries outside. So I said, okay, what's like the best masters in computational design, digital fabrication? So that's where I came across with the DRL here at London, in the Architectural Association. So I said, okay, I'm going there at the end of the year. I packed my things, a couple of months, and then was out. So it was then when I started kind of getting exposed to the game engine world. So I
Yeah.
said, okay, now what I can do then in Grasshopper, I can then package that and they just do it in a game engine. At the time, Unreal was less even documented. I started with Unity, which was
Mhm.
also like a little bit simpler to learn with C Sharp. So I started, extrapolating all the concepts of computational geometry to the game engine world, to yeah, to Unity in this case. So where you could actually then design interfaces, and then you can let someone that it's not technical to use it, which that sounds fascinating. I mean, ironically, have never been quite a gamer, but
Yeah.
I've been just fascinated by the technology
Yeah.
around it. So it's been it's yeah, it was quite interesting just to start learning, let's say, like a new software, and then again, like leveraging with digital fabrication and the robotics. We went to Boston, and that's where we did one piece Audico, and saw that prototype that we did in Boston,
Hmm.
and he said, come to our factory. So they opened the door for us for 3 weeks, 1 month, and we did like the other one-to-one prototype. And the final presentation, Patrick Schumacher was part of the jury. He also teaches there at DRL, but he's, I think they kind of came and immediately got absorbed. I at the moment I didn't really like Zaha Hadid at the moment, or before joining the DRL. Um, and then I became part of the group, of the computational design group. Um, and yeah, I mean, I guess then that's where then that connects to the rest of the
Hmm.
presentation.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of fascinating. So you kind of it seems like common that a lot of people in the computational design space somehow along the way they came across Grasshopper. And then from there, it kind of like set them on this journey. I like also when I was in school, Grasshopper was just kind of like starting, and I did get fascinated. I did like a design fabrication course, and it was kind of fascinating, like that idea of automating like a process, right? Or being able to create these generators that can automate like the form, and then you can, in a sense, parameterize them with other external things, right? Weather and things like that. So now maybe like let's talk a little bit about like your startup. So you're now focusing on these configurators using like a game engine essentially, right? And being able to develop it for like a web interface in some way that a user or a stakeholder can interact with the generators in some way. What do you think are like some of the most I guess like the most potential that these game engines have in this space, and why are you using game engines versus just kind of like coding up your own sort of platform?
That's a great question. And it's a great question because we started doing like the generative part also on the game engine, but then it turns out that there's there's always like these mindsets of digital transformation, that it comes as an inertia, right? Like so when doing something new, you need to think who your user is going to be, and how are you going to either empower your users workflows, or or completely break it and like start something new. So one of the things that like I learned a little bit like early on, especially also before. So instead of having like that generative engine on the game engine on its own,
Mhm.
what we found, it was a little bit made more sense for the clients and for the people using it, which a lot of them were already designers, come from architecture and using Rhino, using Revit on their daily life. So it was to make the plugins of the generative tools within those softwares. So that's why right now it lives a little bit through this ecosystem. It's almost like a software stack where data is important thing, right? Like, so what we're then have is encapsulating data. So it doesn't really matter if it's done in, it could be done in Rhino, or it could be done in Revit, or it could have been done in a game, in the game engine, or as you said, it could just be like a completely standalone platform. The thing is, sometimes it's in order to get someone to really use that technology, it's better if you don't do it in a completely disruptive new environment that they haven't seen before, because a lot of people have resistance to change to their current workflows, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's normal. If you've become good, you've been years developing your confidence on deliver projects in a given environment, and then someone telling you, no, you need to forget these, you need to use now this platform, which in a sense it's also unfair, because then that, like, this platform that we are developing, it won't really substitute necessarily like the CAD programs, right? Like, so that's what we said. Okay, now let's basically turbo, like, boost up CAD software in order that then can produce data that can be configurable in the game engine configurator. So what are game engines good for? Right? For having user-friendly interfaces, for having real-time rendering capabilities, for have communication. It's about that experience side,
Mhm.
right? So, like, the way that we even design the user experience for the designer is different that the user experience that then we design for the developer, like the one that is non-technical, that might just take decisions. Even you can start framing each of these software stacks. So, for example, like, the plugin for the designer is going to be different for the plugin for the engineer, or then the plugin for, so it's about creating these custom tools that different people can interface based on the problem that they have on you know on their daily on a daily basis. Because that's
Mhm.
another thing that we figured out when we were studying a little bit like the market, is that everyone, if you ask, you know all the people in this call, I would imagine a lot of them are architects, like, pretty sure, like, you are going to have an identity of the way that they're going to, of their workflows, right? Like, some of
Yeah.
them might use SketchUp, some of them might use AutoCAD, and then, like, lift it up in AutoCAD 3D. Some might just use Revit, some might then render in V-Ray, another one might export it to Twinmotion, and Enscape, so there are so many workflows. And then, we don't want to come in as a new solution, because we already think that there are, things that are great. We just want
Yeah.
to empower and automate, our clients' workflow, just to make them. So what we do is we study their workflows, and we just empower them just to create, like, the necessary tools to make them better, and then, of course, provide, like, the experience, um or that, like, the real-time experience for our clients. So eventually, we, like, the idea is at this stage is just to develop, like, the tool set and functionality
Mhm.
to come in with a couple of different tools, that would be potentially in a couple of years time, that we can encapsulate and give up. So, for example, like the interior configurator tool that anyone can upload a model, and then you could have, like, this
Mm.
configurator that could become quite accessible, and it's something that we're pushing after. Or, like, just, let's say, like, a tool that gets any Revit model, evaluates all the, like, the wall types, and then you can potentially have this configurator for any Revit model, so make it more scalable.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we really want to just create value to the clients while developing the tools organically, in order to package all these products.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And one of the things that I've seen over the years is between kind of like firms or incorporating like into new software, um is usually like this interoperability between like geometries, right? That usually becomes one of like the bottlenecks in being able to move from software to software. There's things that you might be able to do in Rhino geometrically, or like nerves or more complex geometry in Mayas and so on, that you can really have like a one-to-one relationship in Revit because of the way that the geometry kernel in Revit works. So what do you think about interoperability? Is this something that you see becoming easier over time, um, as we kind of like evolve, let's say, in this tech stack that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question. So, there's what there's let's say, there's a term that is basically how would you define a geometry, right? Like, so
Hmm.
even the way that you would create potentially like a wall, or like the way Revit API exposes the creation of a wall. It could be out through 2 points, through a line, and then a width. So basically, it doesn't really differ that much. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if it's a NURBS or if it's a mesh, as long as you have a descriptive geometry of the information of the components. So that's what we normally do, is what we are creating in a sense is a format that it's not a Revit format, it's not an IFC format, it's not a Rhino format. It's a format that you could read it in Rhino and reconstruct the same wall, or you could read it in Revit and construct exactly the same wall. Because at the end of the day, it's about the data, right? Like, it's about like what does describe a wall, and a wall is just a set of. It's basically could be an endpoint, a finish point, a width and height that just defines you a wall. And then in that graph, if there's does it do you have any do you have windows, do you have walls, windows and doors, and potential or connection to other walls. So that basically started creating a graph structure of components that are aware of each other.
Hmm.
So and that's kind of like the core, a bit of like the technology. That's why how we could potentially create all these floor plans automatically, is because there's a graph relationship through all the elements that it's unfortunately Revit doesn't have that, but it's like the awareness of what wall is connected to which space. So should this wall open or not? But then if that agency, we can leverage on that agency,
Hmm.
then we just have, like, if we need to export it to Revit, perfect. Like, Revit takes this. If you need to reconstruct it in Rhino, well, the Rhino takes these other geometry, or even in the game engine, right? Like, in game
Hmm.
engine, we will have a triangulated mesh, and that is, it's almost like a dead geometry. So it's interesting, as long as the way that we encode the data initially. That's why we try to tell our clients that we try to understand your workflows, your systems, and then we need to parameterize those components in a sense through like our common format, and then push it into a way that like data can flow through any software without any problem. But you we would need to plan that journey. So
Yeah.
it's not there are currently, like, even there's Omniverse that it's trying to do break the barriers between software, and then they're doing a great job. If you're just interested in taking this one model to another, it already does a great job to then collaborating
Hmm.
and with a nucleus on the cloud. But yeah, I mean, I think it's not gonna be at the end of the day one software that is going to like absorb everything. That's why we pay more attention, instead of what's the software, what's the stack. Is more about the data, or it's more about the relationship of the spaces, that is mostly interesting for us.
Yeah. And that makes a good point because, for example, when I think of a configurator, there has to be in order to like automate kind of like the placement of all these things, there has to be some sort of relationships that you have to either design or extract from something, right? So I guess maybe talk a little bit about that because configurators are a little bit they can get pretty complex, right? Like you can have,
Sure.
let's say, a matrix of relationships and it could like scale and then you can get lost in that. So talk about maybe like, what is the structure of a configurator and like how does it work and what are kind of like the main fundamental principles of configurator.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that is fascinated, that what I'm a self-taught programmer, let's call it.
Hmm.
I call myself more an architect than a software developer or a programmer any day. But it's
Yeah.
for this journey, I've had to delve a lot into the low level structure of let's say of software development. And one of the things that it's pretty mainstream, and I mean it's shifting a little bit from time to time. And then like there are a lot of people that know a lot more about that area. But when we talk about object oriented programming, which a lot of languages, as we know, like C++, C#, I think even Python, like they're all object oriented. it's very similar, like the way that you could actually structure the hierarchies of a system architecture is not that different from a building, or from traditional architecture. And I think, and I don't know if you've heard about the term archi architecture as software development, so there's basically an architecture of the system, um,
Hmm.
and it's quite similar between one and another. So that a lot of, let's say, like the technical skills or like the architectural thinking just to make a building, it has helped a lot on building the architecture of these configurators. So how is that? There's as you said, like there's relationship. A room would be assembled by a set of component of walls, and then each of these walls would have a different definition or different properties. Some of them will allow for configurations, some of them not. So it's about basically creating, and then depending on the client, right? So some
Yeah.
some clients would want to allow more flexibilities than other on the way that they get exposed to these virtual environments. So for example, a developer might want to allow their users to change floor types, kitchen types, or even wall partitions without affecting the structure. Some developers might not want to have that hassle, right? Like they want to, produce everything standard. They might allow to change the floor finish. So, that's when we start triggering, like and architecting based on who's your user, who's going to be the final user, who's the
Yeah.
client, what are the needs. That's how you start frame the problem. That's why I don't believe in a universal configurator, or it could be a universal configurator, but then we will be driving to the lines of Sims, like the Sims or Sim City, right? Where
Yeah. Yeah.
everyone could do whatever they want, but it's then there the rules of actual the building then gets broken because you need to make it quite generic.
Hmm.
So we don't want to live in the generic world. We want to live in the make a reality world, right? Like if this is going to be a building, people are going to experience these spaces. Who's going to be the builder? What are the what's their system, right? Like if it's in steel, it's going to be different than if it's in concrete. What sort of finishes are you going to expose? What are the clients that want to live in these properties would be exposed to? So every potential, so there's a big macro of relationship. So we a lot of how we architect everything is graph based, is like the relationship of hierarchical structures about, okay, within a building a building is composed on units. These units are composed on rooms. These rooms are composed on walls. So it's almost, if you see, like the architecture of some of these is basically like a tree. So these trees would have different properties of toggles of, okay, allow configuration, yes, no. So it's about driving all those tweaks and configuring it for a client. Could make another analogy, it's similar, like the way that like we approach these configurators, or the way we approach, it's, I don't know if you've been familiar with CRMs or ERPs, such as Salesforce or
Oh,
SAP,
okay.
for example,
Yeah.
software. So like all of these software companies, let's call it, like there's software as a service or platform as a service as well. They have these modules, but then every client would have a different inventory, different stock, different suppliers, different users. So there are people that then what they do is actually they are certified in the ones that drive the implementation of
Hmm.
this software to each client. So it's quite similar, right? Like that. We want to keep an architecture of modules that is scalable and is quite flexible, and then initially we are implementing it per client on a what are their
Yeah.
needs to make it custom. So that takes some time of development. It's not like some people would expect, they see these configurators and say, okay, these, I want it, and then they expect it's going to work,
Yeah.
tomorrow. But it's not really the case, because like the way that your chain, your stakeholder, connectivity is different than the one from the other client. And then we need to make sure, like if you want to use it, or if it's going to be valuable at the end of the day, it needs to be connected to to the way that you communicate with your stakeholders. Even like spreadsheets are automated in our end. So we export all spreadsheets
Mhm.
differently for each of our clients because they will have different information exposed. So it's about like that idea of having ecosystem of pipelines that are automated in these modules.
Yeah, and a lot of it is the data wrangling that you're talking about, where you have to figure out how all these parts flow in and out. Um, and how do you get, all these things to move in a way that the UI is even like easy to use, right? And I think during the presentation you talked a little about the importance of the UI. So coming from like architecture, like how do you see the UI? Do you like kind of see it as a design problem? And maybe like talk a little about design and UIs, because I think we always forget like that's probably one of the most important things, and any button can change how like a user
Yeah.
behaves. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's another great point. Even uh, for example, in Zaha and Hadid, we use a lot of Maya, and then it's funny because Maya has so much functionality within the
Mm.
software, and then I think we were using just 2% of the software. So if you think it that way, you don't need a lot of the UI bars.
No.
It's almost like a distraction, right?
Yeah.
So that's a great point that like the way that we are this first you need to design the journey, or you need to understand who's your user and what's the
Mhm.
journey of your user. What do they do on a day by day, and how would they approach a problem? So it's almost like if you think it, like more abstract, the way that we even work in a sense, it's quite algorithmic, right? Like there's a procedure. If you get, let's say, like a new site and you want to to make design a building, like the way that
Mhm.
we each work is different on how would you approach that problem, contextually, environmentally, by brief, functionally. So there's like different ways on how people and how these, let's say, like every client in this or every user is going to expose it. So what we do it initially is trying to abstract that journey, saying, okay, we do this is a step by step process. So we would need this functionality here, we would need this X functionality here, and we would need X functionality. So almost like UX, which is like the user experience, like drives a bit, like the roadmap. So
Mhm.
then after that, it comes about the storyboarding, so making the keyframes of the functionality that you want. And then another thing that is very, very important for us is iterating quickly. So instead of saying, like within a year, you're going to have, let's say, like this problem implemented, like, no, let's test it in a couple of weeks. So we could do one functionality that is going to, what's your biggest pain? Okay, this is my biggest bottleneck. Let's just expose that functionality to solve that problem today. Perfect. So we could have, let's say, like an empty screen with a couple of buttons, like, and then that just solves that problem. And then we start adding value and adding the functionality as we start seeing, like our, like the users are requesting it. So, it's almost as if you were making like a new 3D software, if you're going to remake
Yeah.
Maya, it's like, what's exactly the functionality that you need? And I don't need any extra button that is going to confuse me, that is going to, ask a question, what can I do with these? And, it's going to distract me almost like from my journey, right? Like, so again, like that's a great point on, when we design user interfaces, it needs to, of obviously, like a design and the sharpness needs to look good, especially if it's something that end users are going to use, on the technical side only.
Mhm.
um but it's understanding who's the user and what's the functionality that is needed, and make it as simple as it can be, and not anymore. So that's kind of like the key of success on, actually not even on UI. No, I would say on a lot of things, make it as
Yeah.
simple as possible, but not simpler.
Yeah, exactly. And then another thing about like what you're doing is the ability of being able to have uh essentially multiple interfaces, which is like VR or AR and things like that, and on the web. Um, what are like some key components to be able to run these experiences kind of like seamlessly? So I know that you have done kind of like the metaverse where you can like host on the web and run the experience on the web and then have multiple users on there. So what does that look like? What does that setup look like to be able to have this running?
You mean from the web app perspective, from more like the multiplayerness,
Yeah.
or
So like if you're
the
able to push, what you're doing in Unreal Engine to like a web server or whatever you have, to be able to run kind of like this multiplayer
yeah.
experiences on the web. Yeah.
So for example, I mean, the thing is VR and AR are a little bit of a different animals at the moment.
Yeah.
Like on VR, they're like lag and performance is like a big issue. You
Hmm.
want to optimize as much as possible geometries and let's say like the whole experience to run seamlessly. When we talk then to web applications that are embedded now, for example, what we're working a lot is with pixel streaming.
Hmm.
So basically what that happens is like the actual application instead of running in the machine, because bear in mind also like that to run a lot of these real-time rendered visualization, it requires a lot of GPU power. So not all our clients will have RTX NVIDIA powerful machines, but then they would have more like the traditional workstation that and then we don't need it depends also like they're because also like the cost of hosting some of this
Hmm.
application is way more than just your traditional website. So some clients might, if they only have a couple of users that are going to interface with the software, they might just want to have like the physical machine. At the end of the day, the cloud or a server outside is just the machine. It's just the same machine, but it's just not located where you are. It's just located elsewhere in the world, and you are basically routing through it, or accessing through it. So Unreal exposes an API, which is like pixel streaming, which your application is ran in these cloud system. You can put it wherever you want. You're gonna have it in AWS, in Azure, and there's other cloud providers at the moment. And then basically what that does is that you can send the link to the people, and then connect to this server because the server, what it's just doing is running all the computational power on the back, and then it's sending the pixels to the client. Now there's a little bit of issues at the moment that maybe it's not as crisp, and you would have a little bit of extra latency as if you would run it locally
Hmm.
on the application. So that's why we are careful, and that's part as well on mapping the architecture of the configurator, right? Like it's different, like if it's going to run on a tablet on a store, that it could be plugged to a powerful machine on the on
Yeah.
furniture, or it's going to be hosted on the website. So the way that you would even streamline or optimize the model, just to limit the functionality, would vary from project to project. But let's say like if we want to run a multiplayer, multiverse mm, scenario, there would need to be almost like a single instance per user communicating through the main server or the game server, let's call
Yeah.
it, which is then replicating all the information through all the instances. So it's a little bit more complex, to coordinate these in multiplayer. It's something that we are very interested in, and pushing forward, especially for the interaction of having multiple sessions, or because potentially even design one of the things that we even found the pain ourselves is like as
Mm.
designers, we a lot of the time we have a Zoom call, and then you're sharing your screen, and then
Oh yeah.
you take control, right? Like you're taking
Yeah.
control, or let's say, oh, let me take control just to make a point, because I'm getting like super frustrated that I cannot tell you exactly where it is. So it's having that experience, and that happens as designers. For those of you that had that experience in COVID, that was even worse. Right? Like so having these now, after post pandemic, I think we are a little bit more closer in that virtual world. So if we
Hmm.
could even find ways of collaborating seamlessly by expressing ourselves faster, and creating this interactive experience that you can communicate and collaborate, even with potentially with clients, right? Like you don't need to
Yeah.
to set up meetings, and imagine all the time that it gets lost as well, right? Like between commuting or communicate, you could make a lot of things more efficient, especially for small meetings, and get together. And then what happens if in the same session you can run the change that your client wants you to do. So let's say your client wants something, instead of going out, spending a couple of days finding the availability that you
Hmm.
can, matching that availability could be in a couple of weeks time, because and we all have these schedules. So that then connecting back just to see that one single change, that the added value of providing that configuration, or that utility where you can see that change immediately, it already save you a couple of weeks of work, and this could be just
Yeah.
about, changing and rearranging, a couple of things in a furniture that you can showcase in a live render, because a lot of our clients, they don't have, let's say, like that's why they hire architects, right? Like, because as architects we have the vision of how that space would look like, and then we communicate it through nice visuals. Not everyone would see a SketchUp, a Revit model, a screenshot, and see the potential of that space, right? Like, they would need
Yeah.
to see
Yeah.
it with the correct lights, with the correct textures, in order to really, engage. I mean, and sometimes not only our clients, right? Like, I think I've been I've also I've also sometimes, like, even I need to see it myself,
Yeah.
like in this real time experience, in order to really understand the space as architect. So that's something that we're very interested in, like optimizing pipelines, but at the same time, like enhancing that experience at the end. So if we could match both, that's where we try to add value um in the process.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think, yeah, like what you said totally makes sense. I've been in, I've done like work in schools in like New York State. And sometimes like for a presentation to a client or even like the kids at the school will bring in like the headset, right? And they can go into like the building and explore. And it's like a totally different experience than just standing there looking at nice renderings or drawings. And people, really like that immersive part about it. So I think what you're doing kind of with this technology kind of takes it to another level, but maybe it's like much modern now when you can interact in real time and modify things. So that's really cool. And
Mhm.
Cesar, let's talk a little bit about AI because you did mention you did have like AI plugin running along. Maybe talk a little bit about how you see the potential of using AI within your workflow that you're developing. And yeah,
Absolutely.
and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have to admit that initially when Midjourney, started, to say even a couple of years ago, I was quite skeptical. I think it was even on the hater side of the
Yeah.
of the bench. But then, when you start seeing, how Midjourney then evolved in a way where, you could really run
Mm.
this conceptual explorations. I think it's great for conceptual stages, right? Like, I think it just really adds another level of creativity to your tool set. And I think sometimes we get intimidated by new technologies, and it could be as an extrapolation of thinking, okay, I might not be useful in the future. It could be almost like as a fear. But I think, as humans, like, and I've always seen everything that we can do as just tools, right? Like, the more tools you would have, if you my dad, for example, my dad is a mechanical engineer, and he has in the home every sort of tools that you can imagine. He repairs everything from cars to every potential electronic bit. He would fix everything, and then he would do so because he has all the tools at hand to
Mm.
fix them. As architects, or as professionals, I would say, forgetting about architects, as professionals, like, the more tools that you could have under your belt at your disposal at hand immediately, like, the the better you will be at solving any given problem in time, like, the faster with more speed. Um so it's about, and that's why I think that there's no one single tool that is gonna, like, change everything. It's just
Hmm.
gonna be like a set of different tools that, now going to the architectural world, architects, if you can bring different topics of, from different, you can make the complex more complex, right? Like from a
Mhm.
theoretical perspective, from an engineering perspective, from a material perspective, from an environmental perspective, from an AI perspective, right? So you start adding like these layers of complexity to your project, and it becomes part almost of that workflow, right? Like that we were talking
Yeah.
initially, that everyone has their own workflow. So it just becomes part of that other level of agency that, if it just triggers one idea that you can grab from it and makes that project better, that's great, right? Like, so in the sense, what we're trying to do, for example, I mean, we're not going to try to just embed Midjourney into it, but having those early stages renders that, instead of like taking the screenshot and then going to Config UI or automatic, like 1111, or Dream Booth, and then just tweaking everything
Mhm.
else, we can just really tailor even. And we are using Stable Diffusion because it's like the one that is open source,
Yeah.
and you could train it yourself, you could customize it quite nicely through different checkpoints. And because every client, again, will have a different problem, a different style, so you can start tweaking like that model for each of them. So, and again, like being open source and having a nice API that you can just basically take, like, capture from the from the software, in this case is Rhino, and sending it, to that training model, and retrieving it. So that's also something that's proven quite valuable, especially, on, again, like on those early stages. I
Yeah.
haven't seen really like, a render that said, "Okay, go out to production," but it's just about, organically understanding. You might, again, as said before, you might fix on a nice detail that you would haven't think about, on that perspective that you had in there. So it's just about adding, giving you as much tools as you can in a very fast way, so you don't need to take a screenshot and go as well. So we think time is money. Time is very valuable. Time is like the most valuable thing, for
Yeah.
in a way, and we try to, act upon it. So if we can, streamline a little bit like that process, integrating some features, which is, at the end of the day, is it's quite straightforward. And then, like, at least in Stable Diffusion until today, things are changing a little bit now with Stability AI. But until today, it's quite a friendly, open source, way of, again, seeing you know what you can do with it. So yeah, it's quite interesting just to see how that takes off.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I guess like a little bit further from like just generative images, do you see any other aspects of AI that might that are, I guess, would help your building configurators or expand the abilities of your configurators that you might
Yeah.
be interested in pursuing?
So yes, I mean, that's also like an interesting point. For example, even with in UCL, we're teaching now a course. It's a master program. It's a research based program. So we're trying to exploring a little bit on that, right? What can we do with diffusion models out of the world of just generating images, but you can generate floor plans. There's also like GANs, and there's, even with, modern diffusers, you could start generating and overlaying like these organic floor plans, or like using reinforcement learning. Some of these there's APIs for deep learning and reinforcement learning in Unity, and nowadays in Unreal. So it's working a little bit with that agency, like how can we train, the model or the AI, just to give some agency to the computer and come up with interesting spaces. It's very early days,
Mhm.
but it's just trying to research a little bit what can we do with it. As I said, like, for at least on a research side, it's more about than generating images. Although there's like a nice tweak of the, like, generation. For example, in the even like on the generation of images, like the way that we communicate with Stable Diffusion is like we could also map a segmentation map, and then that
Yeah.
segmentation map would be, you already label, since since the generative tool already knows what's a window, what's a wall, what's, you can
Mm,
we
yeah.
overlay a segmentation model on top of it. So having that communication and fine tuning of the AI, it's quite fascinating. We were even speculating, like at some point we talk about UI, but like UI as we know it might change quite dramatically now with the use of LLMs, right? Like you can, instead of touching buttons and expose the functionality in toolbars, you can just say what you want to do, and then potentially that there's a natural, an NLP, natural language processing model that evaluates what words did you say, map it to the correct input output, and just trigger the functionality without seeing any button, or any toolbar. So
Yeah.
it's quite interesting on how like the UX UI can change, how in the world of architecture, when we train a little bit more, like these models can change. We're seeing it now with a generation of, potentially we think like even in a couple of years, like renders, we would be able to produce very nice renders that are high fidelity by using this technology quite fast, and easy in a sense. So we want to be on top of it, but more, like on a almost as a research side. So just trying to feed into the core of the business, anything that we feel that is valuable for the clients at this stage.
Yeah, and I guess like and we're coming up to the hour, so we can close it with this. But one of the I guess like one of the things that I've been interested in being able to use generative AI in that sense is the idea that for example, architects are always looking for novel solutions, and sometimes those solutions are driven by context constraints, site constraints, building codes, and things like that. And would these, or I don't know if you have any idea of this or thought about it, but do these generative models, do you think, present an opportunity to think up of new solutions? And maybe like you talked about like the image generation as being kind of like a nice way to explore concepts, but when you go beyond that, where you're now actually designing configurators and things like that, that might need more architecture intelligence, let's say, right? Do you see generative models being able to provide you kind of like novel solutions in the future, or you think that's something that is still rather hard to do for architects?
No, well, we're trying to, I mean, we try to do always like a combination
Hmm.
of human, human machine, understanding what again, each of these models, like it's nowadays, I think there's kind of like in a way, a misunderstanding of, how AI works, and a lot of people think that just, like AI as this black box, that it's one, you know, brain, like it's able to do everything. So I've been even approached by clients. They want to say, okay, hey, I want to, we have data out of, thousands of buildings, and we want to be able to make them, training a neural network. I said, like, like potentially a neural network is not going to solve the problem, or it's going to be really hard to train. um, for example, let's take into another example in the
Hmm.
financial world. So you could have all the data on the world of stock prices, dated of, like for 40 years or probably more.
Yeah,
And then you know how hard it is to predict what the stock
yeah,
is going to do tomorrow. That's, I think, is only one, Renaissance technologies. I think it's
yeah,
only, and then they're super, super, like close on their they haven't talked to anyone, and they've been able to do so. And probably is because they have taken, it's kind of like the casino model, right? Like it's been taking a 1% of extra chance. So they are 51% right, and 49%, like
mm,
they have a 1% always, on advantage, the
yeah,
same as a casino, and but if you do a lot of bets, you make a lot of money. It's quite similar, in architecture. Trying to train a model that is going to solve, like every potential configurator based on a context is quite hard. But as humans, and then that goes back to the idea that, as architects, we approach a problem quite algorithmically. So in this case, is about breaking more, like the algorithm of how a human would break down a site, and rationalize it. Of course, there's a lot of things that would need to be edited afterwards,
Yeah.
but we are interested in also getting, like an 80% accuracy very fast, and then we leave like the extra 20, that so we could leverage a lot of that work early on. And then there are other tools. For example, there's generative as evolutionary software that is just basically an optimization, right? Like you could maximize or minimize something. So if you're able to quantify through metrics a solution, let's say your net sellable area ratio against your um, gross
Mhm.
external area, for example. That's a developer metric that they want to also always optimize as much sellable area that they can do out
Yeah.
of the full construction. If you can quantify that, and then you have your system in a way, the structure, let's say like the overall DNA of your building in parametric, which that's what we try to do, then you can run the parameters of the flexible parameters in order that they can relax and try to find optimal solutions through thousands and thousands of generations, but it will be within quite constrained parameters
Yeah.
that we need to frame it with. So it's not going to be a one fit all solution anytime soon, at least from where the technology stands at the moment. So we don't need to be afraid that, like an AI is going to take our jobs.
Yeah.
At most, we just need to understand it, understand each model, and understand what is it good for, and then try as architects, as that we're good associating between things, right? Like connecting things that seem disconnected, but I think I would say generally architects were good at it, trying to map things. So if you can connect that with any given architectural problem, just to solve specific things, that's something, that definitely is going to add, a unique selling point of your service as a, you know, as a as an architect.
Yeah. And I think we can end on that because you make a, like one of the points that I keep returning to is that even with like Mid-Journey or these kind of models that are just spitting out images, it's not necessarily like the AI that's creative. It's usually like the person that identifies something out of it and they kind of give it importance in some way or some value, and then it gets translated into another process. So Cesar, thank you so much for this conversation. It was really interesting, and you have a lot of really profound insights in how like kind of like these projects are working in configurators and how they can be adapted. I guess not only for marketing, but just in design uh, pipelines essentially. So that was really interesting to see. So again, thank you very much for being part of this. I appreciate it, and yeah, we'll keep in touch, and we hope to see what else you develop over the coming years and months.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I mean, again, like the pleasure is all mine, and it's. Thank you for the opportunity to end the channel. To also have these sort of conversation, which I believe they are quite valuable for our communities. And as an architectural community, um, and then potentially debate. And but yeah, it was a really nice conversation, and I'm happy. I'm hopefully like it triggers some ideas and excites some people. And I always looking forward to also keep our discussions in like within the community and out of the table as out in the past. So thank you again for the invitation, and for all the great content that you're pushing out there.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it, Cesar. So Cesar, thank you again, and have a good day.
Thank you.
See you soon. All right.
Thank you, Daniel. Likewise. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.